Remember Rebel Racing? For a while, it felt like one of those mobile racing games that could become huge. With licensed cars, quick races, and surprisingly polished graphics, it had plenty going for it. But as the years passed, the game slowly faded from the spotlight. So what happened to Rebel Racing? How did a game that once had a growing player base become so easy to forget? Today, let's go back and look at the rise, peak, and slow decline of Rebel Racing. Rebel Racing was released in November 2019 by Hutch Games, a studio already known for mobile titles built around cars and competitive gameplay. The idea was pretty straightforward. Take the excitement of racing games like Asphalt, but make the races shorter, simpler, and easier to pick up on a phone. And visually, Rebel Racing made a strong first impression. The game featured licensed cars from manufacturers such as Ford, Chevrolet, and BMW, along with detailed environments and a polished presentation that looked impressive for a mobile game. The gameplay focused on quick one-on-one races. Instead of complicated controls, you mainly had to steer, brake, and use boosts at the right moments. This made it easy for casual players to jump in, while upgrading cars and unlocking new vehicles gave players reasons to keep playing. It wasn't necessarily revolutionary, but Rebel Racing arrived at the right time. Mobile gaming was growing rapidly, and there was clearly an audience for a racing game that looked good without demanding too much from the player. Then came 2020, and the world changed. With lockdowns keeping millions of people at home, mobile gaming became an even bigger part of everyday entertainment. And Rebel Racing happened to be in a pretty good position to benefit from it. Players had more free time, and short racing games were perfect for picking up a phone and playing for a few minutes. Rebel Racing offered quick events, a growing collection of cars, and enough progression to keep things moving. For players who wanted something more visually impressive than a basic mobile racer, it was an easy game to try. The game also benefited from the mobile gaming boom happening across the industry. People were discovering or returning to games they could play without needing a console or PC, and Rebel Racing fit neatly into that trend. During this period, the game continued receiving updates, new cars, and events, giving existing players reasons to come back. It wasn't suddenly the biggest racing game in the world, but it had something valuable: momentum. For a mobile game still relatively early in its life, the timing couldn't have been much better. Rebel Racing had found an audience, and for a while, it seemed like the game could continue growing alongside it. But the circumstances that helped Rebel Racing also eventually changed. As lockdowns ended and people returned to school, work, travel, and their usual routines, the huge amount of time available for mobile gaming began to shrink. That didn't mean everyone suddenly stopped playing Rebel Racing. The game still had its dedicated players, and updates continued to keep the experience alive. But the wider mobile gaming landscape was becoming much more competitive. New racing games kept arriving, while established franchises continued attracting attention with bigger updates, more cars, and more ambitious features. Players also had more reasons to move between different games instead of sticking with one. For Rebel Racing, this created a difficult situation. It had already established its identity around short, accessible races, but that formula could only carry the game so far. Without a major change that brought it back into the spotlight, it gradually became less talked about. The pandemic-era boost had ended, and Rebel Racing now had to survive on the strength of its existing community. That was when its slow decline really began. Rebel Racing didn't disappear overnight. There was no single update or event that suddenly killed the game. Instead, its decline was much quieter. Over time, the game became less visible compared with newer and more heavily promoted mobile racing titles. For many players, there simply wasn't a strong reason to return after experiencing most of what Rebel Racing offered. Its core gameplay remained familiar, but familiarity can eventually become a weakness. Without a major reinvention, the game struggled to generate the same excitement it had during its earlier years. And that's probably what makes Rebel Racing interesting today. It wasn't a massive failure. It was a game that had its moment, found an audience, and then gradually slipped out of the conversation. Another factor was simply the passage of time. Mobile players constantly move between games, especially when new releases offer bigger features or a fresh experience. Rebel Racing had already built its foundation, But keeping attention year after year is much harder than getting it in the first place. As fewer people talked about the game online, it became easier for new players to miss it entirely. And eventually, Rebel Racing went from being a game people were discovering to one that mostly existed in the background. So, where does that leave Rebel Racing in 2026? The game may not have the same presence it once had, but its story is still interesting. It represents a time when mobile racing games were becoming more ambitious, and when a relatively simple idea could attract a surprisingly dedicated audience. Rebel Racing wasn't destroyed by one major mistake. It simply lost momentum as the mobile gaming world moved forward. And maybe that's why it's worth remembering. Not every forgotten game needs to have been a failure. Sometimes a game can succeed, entertain thousands of players, and still eventually fade into the background. So, if you remember playing Rebel Racing, this one's for you. And if you never tried it, well, now you know about one of mobile gaming's forgotten racers.